Hello once again and welcome back to System Administration. This is episode 2. Last episode I said I was going to do DHCP and NTP in this episode. Now I recorded an episode fully intending to do that and then realized that I'd never actually spoken about how to manage things inside of Windows or Linux and how we're going to go about actually applying some of the things that we're doing. This episode's going to cover just the simple things that come with a basic Windows install and a basic Linux install. The things that you need to have, the things that you need to know about, and how to get access to them. We're going to start with Windows. So we're going to change over to our Windows machine. We're sitting at the login screen. Now it's a little bit wider than last time. The reason for that is I've gone in and installed the drivers for all of the virtual hardware that Windows doesn't quite know. So we're going to go into here, and we're going to type in our password, and we're going to end up at our desktop. Now, Windows Server 2012 R2 will automatically start the server manager when you log in. There is a very good reason for this. Server Manager is supposed to be your one-stop shop for everything to do with Windows Server Management. We're going to go through a lot of this stuff today, because eventually we're going to use it to control more than just this server. So to start with, the general layout puts you at a dashboard, which shows you all the roles and the server groups you've got down the bottom here, down in this big section. But it also shows you some quick start stuff that we can hide, which we will. It also, down the left, gives you the different groupings and also services, so that you can quite easily go and check on a specific service should you be having an issue with it. Now, the dashboard itself is just this section over to the right hand side, the big open section that says roles and server groups. If we go to local server, you'll see it lists the details of the local server. So we get things like the computer name, whether it's part of a work group or a domain, whether the firewall is on, if remote management is allowed. Now, Windows 2012 R2 defaults to having remote management on. That's how you can use one server manager to manage all the servers on your network. I'd suggest leaving it on unless you have a good reason to turn it off. Remote desktop is disabled. Now, there's a very good reason for that as well. If you're going to do it the way Windows and Microsoft basically want you to do it, you wouldn't use remote desktop like you used to. In the old Server 2008 and Server 2008 R2 days, you'd turn on remote desktop and you'd remote desktop into every server to make sure that server was up and running. Server 2012 R2 wants you instead to use the remote management features, not the remote desktop option. You can still enable it, it's not going away anytime soon, but it's suggested that you don't. And I, as a matter of fact, would have a server set up on your domain with remote desktop turned on that actually has the server manager, so that you can, if you're off-site, remote into a server and see and manage everything. There are some security risks with that. The first is, that's a single point of entry into your network. Not a great idea. But at the same time, it's not a bad option, especially in later episodes when we start talking about things like VPNs. But we'll get to that in much later episodes. For the time being, we're just going to talk about the basics. NIC teaming. Now, NIC is the network interface card, and NIC teaming allows you to have multiple network interface cards assigned a single IP address, a single address to be accessed by, but provide the combined bandwidth of all of the network cards. NIC teaming is good, but if you're in a virtualized environment, you're not really going to be teaming the NICs together. Normally what would happen is you would set up one network connection, which will be at 10 gigabits or 100 gigabits, depending on which sort of connection you've got, and then you would just use that connection. You wouldn't set up a team of virtual NICs. It doesn't really work that way. NIC teaming is more for a hardware level, and it's especially useful if you're going to run Hyper-V, which is the Microsoft hypervisor. We're going to go into Hyper-V much further down the track. For the time being, that option is there. The Ethernet setting tells you what the IP address is for your Ethernet connection, or multiple Ethernet connections, and also whether IPv6 is enabled and configured. Now you can see there that we've got an IP address which matches our Linux box, except it's in the .20 range instead of the .10 range. That's the two networks we're going to use. Linux will be in 172.16.10.0. Windows will be in 172.16.20.0. IPv6 enabled means that IPv6 has been turned on for this server, but it's not configured with a static ID, or static IPv6 address, I should say. There's a reason behind that. We're not going to talk about IPv6 just yet. We're going to talk about that down the track, but for the time being, we've just left IPv6 enabled. Nothing special, it's just turned on. On the other side, you'll see we've got last installed updates, which is never, because I've never updated this machine. We've got Windows Update, which is not configured, again, because I've never updated this machine. And last checked for updates, never. Windows error reporting is off. Now, Windows error reporting is, will this server send reports for errors back to Microsoft should something go wrong? There's an argument to be said that you shouldn't turn this on because it can leak information, but at the same time, Microsoft tend to work fairly hard to make sure that any information that's leaked is completely useless to anyone. They obfuscate everything. I would suggest actually having this option turned on along with the customer experience improvement program. Now, why is that? The reason for that is Microsoft uses the information that comes from the customer experience improvement program to actually improve your experience. So if you end up only using the server manager and PowerShell to do all of your management stuff, Microsoft will actually design Windows Server to be more like that. It's really up to you if you turn those features on. I would suggest turning them on. We'll get to that in a minute. i.e. enhanced security configuration. What this means is, if you open up Internet Explorer on this server, unless the domain has been set as a safe domain for you to access, you will not be able to get to that website. Now, is that an issue? Kind of. Realistically, that should be turned on for every server except your terminal server or your remote desktop server, which is basically the terminal server just with a new name. Now, I suggest leaving it on, but that's going to lead to problems with this particular video series because I won't have a file server set up or USB access to this server or the ability to put files into this server easily. Now, I'm doing that for a very specific reason. I don't want this to be, hey, look, I've got cool toys, let's go from here. I want this to be, wait, I'm just starting from the base. I don't have access to anything. How do I get this working? Therefore, I'm going to turn off the enhanced security configuration. But I'll do that in a little bit. We've then got the time zone. Now, that's the local time zone for the server. I am in the Brisbane time zone, so I've set mine to Brisbane. We've then got the product ID, which is not activated. Now, it's not activated because I haven't gone in and actually hit activate. That's the first thing we're going to do. We click on not activated, and you'll see it will ask me for a product key. Now, I entered a product key during the install to step through there. I'm going to enter the product key again. You're not going to be able to see it. I'm just going to enter it and go from there. So I'll be back in a minute once I've entered the product key. Alright, so I had some fun trying to activate it with my product key, and I believe I've typed the product key in wrong. So I'm gonna leave it alone for the minute, dig the CD out later, find out what the actual product key is. But for the time being, we're going to live with a non-activated product. We're going to step back through the rest of these things right now though. So we're going to go to Windows error reporting. We're going to change this from off, and we're going to say, yes, automatically sends summary reports. Detailed reports give Microsoft much more information. It's up to you which one you want. I personally would send the summary reports all the time, and possibly put detailed reports on things like terminal servers and that sort of stuff. Most of the built-in Windows services, if they break, Microsoft can normally replicate the issue with just the summary reports. For terminal servers, however, especially when you've got certain software that's interacting in different ways, sending a detailed report is definitely a better option for Microsoft. It's up to you. I'm going to leave it set to send automatically with the summary reports. We're also going to go to our customer experience improvement program, and we're going to say, yes, I want to participate in this. And away we go. Now you'll see they haven't updated yet. That's because we haven't refreshed. Up the top beside what looks like an address bar, we have a refresh button. And if I click that, it'll go through, it'll check on everything. It'll then come back and tell us that we've turned on Windows error reporting and we're participating in the customer experience improvement program. That's a good start. So now we're going to go up here to Windows Update, and we're going to hit Not Configured, and it's going to ask us how we want to turn this on. You'll see there's Turn on Automatic Updates as a nice big button, and then a little link below it that says, let me choose my settings. Turning on automatic updates will turn on the highest level of automatic updates, which is not necessarily a good thing for servers. Automatic updates will automatically download the updates and install them, and then start pressuring you for a restart. If we go into let me choose my settings, however, you can see that we can change this to say download updates, but let me choose whether to install them, check for updates, but let me choose whether to download, or never check. I almost always go with download them, but let me choose whether to install them. The reason for this is, if you download them, and there's a critical update that has to be applied day 0, because there's a day 0 exploit, you can quite easily just hit the install button and they'll all install. Like, turn up at work at 7:30, install all the updates, get all the servers up and running by 8:30 for everyone else to start. If you instead set it to automatically install, you might get a reboot at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Or, get a reboot at 3 AM and the server doesn't come up, all that sort of stuff. It can be bad. This is probably the best setting I know of. Allowing you to choose to download can save you bandwidth, but over the course of the time you're going to be dealing with this, the bandwidth you save is tiny. It's really not useful. Never checking for updates is not a good idea. You should always check for updates. I like letting it download the updates. We'll go from there. Now, I also tick the recommended updates box. The reason for this is recommended updates are not things that have to be installed, but are things that will probably help you in some way, shape, or form. This option should only be enabled on servers that aren't going to really be dealing with third-party software. The reason for that is recommended updates can break features that other software uses. Can even break Windows features, but that rarely happens. What you're really worried about there is a recommended update coming in and destroying something that you've set up. On this server, we're not going to deal with anything that's not Microsoft. We're just going to hit the recommended updates button. On a server like an app server or that sort of thing, I would only ever install the important updates. You've also got Microsoft Update, which allows you to update the Microsoft software that you install on here, like Office. I don't normally bother with this on a server. There's no real reason for Microsoft Update to deal with the Microsoft updates for Microsoft software. Once again, recommended updates, Microsoft updates, it's up to you. I suggest at least giving recommended updates a go. Important updates, definitely have it set to at least download them. Now we go through the first check. So it's going to do our check for updates for the first time because we've configured it. It's then going to show me I've got, I think it's like 58 different updates or something right now. It might be slightly more, it might be slightly less. I'm not going to install them yet because that will just take most of this video of me watching this little bar and then jumping back to Linux and going, well, we'll do this other thing. So I'm going to let it check for the updates, but I'm going to let it do that in the background. I'll install them in the gap between this episode and the next episode. For the time being, it's updating. We don't really have anything else to change here, except the computer name. Now, Win, L8, VCMF, blah, 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 not a useful name. We're going to change that to the actual name of this server that we're going to eventually end up with. This computer description, however, isn't the computer name. The computer description for this one is going to be the Teach VLAN 2 DC01. So that's just a human visible description of this computer. You actually have to click change to change the host name. The host name is tvl2-DC01. That's the computer name. Now you'll note there's no domain attached to that. We will join this to a domain later when we add this as an Active Directory server. But that's a couple of episodes away for the time being. Right now we're just going to hit OK. And it's going to change the computer name and then tell us that we have to restart. You don't have to restart automatically though. Down the left hand side you'll also see the All Servers option. Now, All Servers talks about all the servers that are connected, and it gives you lots of different stuff. At the top, the Servers option shows you the list of servers. So right here, with all of these separate details, we can add details if we want. So we can right click here and we can add the amount of memory. We can add the type of processor. Underneath that, you then have events. Now this is the event viewer log for every server that you've attached to this server management instance. At the moment there's only one, and you'll see there's a ton of different security events there. They're standard security events because the license failed. Services, you'll see all the services per server and whether they're stopped or running. You've got a best practices analyzer, which we will go through later. Best practices analyzer, great tool. We're not going to worry about it just yet. We then have a performance area, which shows you how much CPU usage and available memory there have been. Currently it's turned off. We're going to turn this on later when we start talking about performance, but for the time being, just know it's there. And then we've got roles and features. Now this is a list of the roles and features installed on each server inside this server manager. Great feature, really useful. It can tell you exactly where a service is across your whole network. That being said, we don't normally use it. Normally you navigate to a server or you've got the server named in such a way that you know what's on there. We're going to deal with this later as well, but currently we only have one server and thus managing multiple servers is not what we're going to be looking at. We've also got the file and storage services. Now this is default on every Server 2012 R2 machine, and that's because file and storage services covers things like hard drives, VSS operation, and storage pools. Server 2012 R2 does this very well. Now in volumes you'll see it, we've got the two volumes that we've got. Under disks you'll see it lists just one 50 gigabyte disk, which is exactly what we've got, and we currently have no storage pools. We will be building storage pools later. For the time being, not so much. We're going to go back to the dashboard now, and we're going to leave Windows and go across to the Linux platform. So over here in Linux, we'll go and log in. Now the first thing Windows users need to know about Linux is you don't press tab at the end. If I type in the username and press tab, we end up with a tab key. The reason for this is on this command line, tab doesn't bring up the password. It's not an end of line sequence. we have to hit enter. And then we type in our password like normal. And we're in. Linux for Windows users is a bit different. It does some things that are really, really, really cool, and some things that are kind of really annoying. PowerShell has, I can't really say copied, but it emulates a lot of the things that Linux command prompts do now. And there are actually quite a few different Linux command prompts. We're going to deal with Bash. We're only going to deal with Bash for the moment. We will eventually go through all of the other ones, cache, TSH, all these sorts of things. But for the time being, Bash is the one we're going to use. We're going to start off with the simplest thing that you will type in all the time, and that is sudo. Now, sudo stands for super user do. This is the way that you, as a user, get elevated to a position that you can actually do things. If I were to try and install a package, so we're going to talk about Yum in a second. You'll see it says we need to be root. The reason for this is, if you're a local user on a Linux system, you cannot make changes to anything that is critical to the system itself. You can make changes to anything you've been given access to, but one step further than that and you have no ability whatsoever. Most functions that we're going to use, we will need to be root. So when we install things, when we uninstall things, when we start editing system configurations, all that sort of stuff will have to be the root user. So we'll need to start typing sudo for everything. Does it get annoying? Kind of. But it's a great security feature. This means that any user that gets access to this server has to type in either, like for sudo, they have to be a member of the sudo group, which is called wheel, and they have to know the password. Now that seems like something stupid. Of course they know the password, they've logged into the machine. Except that a lot of Linux administrators don't use passwords. They use private keys. Now we're going to go through private keys later. I'm going to show you how to set them up and how awesome they are and that sort of thing. Suffice is to say, people could have a private key and be able to get access to this machine and still not be able to do anything because they don't know what the user's password is. Now, we'll go through all that later, but for the time being, at least you know about it. We're now going to talk about Yum. Now, Yum is the Yellow Dog Updater modified. I'm not going to go into the history of Yum because there's a lot of history around it. But suffice it to say, Yum is the package manager for CentOS. Now, Yum allows us to install packages, to go and search for packages, to check the information on them, to enable and disable repositories of packages, and all that sort of stuff. So the first thing we're going to do with Yum is we're going to type help. Now, you'll see we're asked for our password. We're going to type a password in. And we've got part of the help page. You'll see that at the top it says -E error level. But that's not all of the help. There's actually more help above that. The problem we've got here is our screen doesn't scroll. This is a fixed terminal window, so we have no way of going back up what's been printed to the screen. However, we do have another function that you'll start using a lot of called less. So if I type in a pipe character, which is that character that you never use above the backslash, and then less, you'll see we've now got the top of the help menu. We've got list of commands, and we've got all the commands we can run. We've got the options that we can apply to the commands, and we've got a semicolon, we've got a colon down the bottom there. That colon allows us to do lots of cool things. But this whole set of text is in what's known as less. Now, less is a way of capturing the output of a command and displaying it to the screen. So we can use less in a number of different ways. Now, that's not entirely the correct definition of less, but for the time being, that's what we're going to use it for. We'll eventually use it for going through log files and that sort of stuff, but right now, less allows us to merely capture what was displayed to the screen so that we can read through it at our own speed. So you can see here we've got check and check update as the start of our commands. You will very rarely use them. We'll go through what they do at a later date. We're going to stick with a couple of really simple ones right now. We're going to deal with clean, which removes any cache data that we have. We're going to deal with info, install and list. We're going to deal with history. And we're going to deal with search. Now, there are other things here, and there's a lot of other different options here. We're going to deal with those 5 really simply. We'll also quickly deal with update, but update is quite simply the way of updating all the packages on your system. You type sudo yum update, it updates all of your repos and then all the packages on your system. It will ask you before you do the update, so you don't have to worry too much. Now, using the keyboard, we're going to scroll down, and you're going to see that this is the line that was at the top of our window before. So we'd missed a whole page of information when we just typed sudo yum help. Now that we've got less, we can scroll down and scroll back up again to see the information that we need. So if we want to check for a flag like verbose, -v, -verbose, we can check and see that it exists, and we can go from there. To get out of less, we type q, and that quits us. Now, inside of less, we can also search for certain things. If you do a /, you can then type help, and it will find any of the help mentioned, or any mention of the word help inside the text. You can also use it for special characters, so we can search for equals, and it will show us all the equals. We can search for --, and it will show us all the double minuses. We can search for package, and it will show us every mention of the word package. How useful are these? It's up to you. Searching inside of the yum help, not very useful. It's really easy to read. It's quite simple to use. Searching inside log files, really useful. We'll get there in a little while. For the time being though, we're just going to quit, provided I hit the right key. And we're going to go with yum update to start off with, just to show off what's going on. So we type yum update, you'll see we've got all these packages to update. I'm not going to do them, I'm going to do them offline like I did with the Windows one, but there's a ton of packages there. But see how down the bottom there it tells you the total number of installed packages, of upgrade packages, the total download size, and then it asks if you're okay to do this. When we hit no, it will tell us that there's a transaction already saved that we can go back to this should we need to. This is a very useful function. Transactions allow us to set up installing something and then go, we'll deal with that later. Or one of these prerequisites is something that we need to worry about now. We'll install the prerequisite, then we'll reload the transaction and go from there. How useful loading transactions is depends on exactly what sort of things you're trying to do, but generally it's a good idea. It's really useful. We'll move into history, because sudo yum history actually shows you what's been done with yum. Now you'll see there that we've got 7 different things. The first one's a system, and that was an install of 303 packages. We then had an install of 1 package, an install of 3 packages, an erase of 2 packages, and then EI, which means erase and install. So we erased and installed 3 packages, we erased and installed 3 packages, then we erased 2 packages. This was from the video that I had shot about DHCP servers before I realized that I hadn't told you how to use yum, so none of this would make any sense to you. with the history function, you end up with a lot of extra features. So if I type sudo yum history redo 2, that tells us that we want to redo the historical event 2. I'm not going to do it, but that allows us to redo that action. You'll note, however, that in the help that we had, where if I go up to help, we don't see anything about redo. That's actually information that's held in what's known as man. Now, man is a function that looks up manuals. Linux uses manuals for everything. If I type man yum, you'll see that we now have a manual on how to use Yellow Dog Updater modified. And it gives you a ton of stuff. There is a lot of different stuff in here. You can read through everything. It will tell you how to do just about everything with yum that you could possibly need to do. And if we go down to history, you'll see we have basically a whole page of stuff. History is great. It allows you to do tons of stuff. I'll let you read that at your own leisure. Feel free to install CentOS and read this. It's also available on the web. If you go to Google and just type in man yum, it will actually take you to a lot of results that give you the user manual for yum. And it's basically just a website with this in it. It's quite awesome. For the time being though, we're just going to press Q to quit. Take us back to our command prompt. We'll look at so sudo yum search. One of the first ones you'll do, we go searching for a package or a description of a package. So we can type DHCP, and you'll find that it will list us all of the DHCP options that are both name and in the description. The description's the bit to the right hand side after the semicolon. This is generally how it's used. You do a yum search for whatever you're looking for, so you might be looking for Node.js. Now you'll see that we've got no results for Node.js. But it could also be this, which we don't have, or it could just be Node and then a space. Now you'll find that Node.js isn't actually available yet. It's part of a repository that I haven't activated. Sudo yum install. Install is the package installation process. So to install a package, we go package name. So we searched for DHCP before. We could install DHCP, but we're actually going to search for a text editor. So we'll do a search. We'll do a search for text editor. And you'll see it's picked up text editor across everything. Now, there's quite a few different ones there. You've got KText editor, which is graphical. It's for KDE4. You've got Emacs. You've got gedit, Kate, Kwrite, Nano. That Perl syntax highlight engine is actually a plugin for Kate that allows you to highlight Perl syntax inside of Kate. And you've got sed, which is a stream editor. Now, sed is something we'll deal with again way later on in this process. But for the time being, we're just going to install Nano, which is a small text editor. So we go sudo yum install Nano. You'll see there's one package to install. It's Nano. We've got install one package, total download size 440k, installed size 1.6 meg. Is this okay? And yes, it is. We've now installed Nano, and you can see that by if I type nano minus help, we get a list of help for Nano. Nano is very simple as an editor. If I nano txt, we've got a basic editor with some options down the bottom. That pointing up arrow at the start is a caret, so C-A-R-E-T, caret, and it is obtained by pressing Control. So Control X will exit us from Nano. Now, this is breaking off into another thing, which is text editors. There are quite a few different text editors, as you saw from this list. We've got Emacs 1, gedit 2, Kate 3, Kwrite 4, Nano 5, and then K-Text Editor 6. You actually have far more than that, but they're not described as text editors. If I go and search for a program called Vim, you'll see we've got a Vim as well. Now, Vim is a text editor very similar to Emacs. Vim and Emacs are both great text editors. There's an argument in the Linux world as to which one's best, because of course there is. I tend to use Vim. I basically grew up using Vim. I'm used to using Vim. I don't like using Emacs just because it's a slightly different system and it confuses me all the time. I used to use Nano as well. Nano is considered not a great editor. It does work. It's great for certain situations. I prefer Vim. It's far more powerful. So we're going to install Vim as well. And you'll see that Vim actually has quite a few other packages to go with it. So you're going to hit yes and install Vim. And it's going to install all the packages. And then it's going to drop us back out and tell us that it installed all of those dependencies as well as Vim Enhanced. Now Vim works in the same way. We have a file, but you'll see there's no command prompt, there's no commands at the bottom. There's not very much to this window at all. And as a matter of fact, if I start typing, so I'm going to type N, you'll see that we actually get E35, no previous regular expression. That's because unless you're in insert mode, Vim doesn't let you type characters. Insert mode is quite easily turned on by pressing I, and you'll see we're in insert mode. And here I can type N as far as I go. To leave insert mode and go back to what's known as command mode, I press escape. Now that seems really annoying to start off with. Oh, I can't just navigate around and delete stuff and add stuff and change what I'm typing as I go. That's horrible. Why would I want to use this? The reason for that is you can do some very cool things. If I press YY, I've now copied that line. I can then press P and it pastes the line. I can type in a number and then press P and it does it that many more times. Okay, nothing too special there. That's great. We've done a couple of different lines. There are a number of other powerful features that come with Vim that you can do, but I'll go into the Vim later when I start talking about specific areas of Linux. Time being, we're going to be using Vim to do all of our editing, and to leave Vim, we're going to type colon, so it's a command, and then Q to quit, and then exclamation mark to say forcefully. Don't ask me to save, don't do any of that, just quit. And you'll see we're back to our command prompt. Now, there's two other quick elements I'd like to talk about. The first one is the use of control and the features you can do with bash. If I type control L, everything's been cleared. Control L is what's known as a buffer clear. It clears out everything that is currently being displayed to the screen. In PuTTY, and if you're using a Linux machine and you SSH in, you can scroll back up in the terminal to see what you've done, because all this does is just push everything off the top of the screen and then print the terminal text again. But it's quite useful if you've got a page full of stuff that's really messy and you're just trying to read what you're doing. The other thing is, you can use the up keys and down keys to navigate the history of your commands. This is very useful if you've done something before and you want to look at how you did it. You also have the ability to press Ctrl and R, and this does a search through your history for what you start typing. So if I type yum, you'll see we've got Y, and we've already picked up on yum. But if I type yes, you'll see we can't find anything. And even if I type a U now, it doesn't start with the U because it's now searching for YESU. And if I press backspace, I can actually backspace back to the Y and then type yum and it'll find it. within this, if you press Control R again, it will search the next response back, and it will keep doing this until we get back to the first time I typed YU in the history, which will be actually quite a while back. From here, if I type Control C, it will clear the reverse and bring us back to our command prompt. If you want the command, you actually press the arrow key. So we type U, and we'll go with, we want to search for text editor. If I press across, it'll bring that command up to our command prompt and put our cursor right beside where we were. We can then go to the end and of course change it. Apart from these simple shortcuts, there's not really very much else to worry about. You do have quite a few other different things that we can do inside of Bash, but for the time being, they're very advanced and we don't really need to worry about it that much. So instead, we're just going to leave it as it is, and I'm going to end the episode here, and when we come back, we'll actually do DHCP and NTP, because now you've been told how to use Linux and Windows. For the time being, this is Jordan Keith, signing out. Thank you for watching the video. Please leave comments down below. I'd like to know how this is going for people and whether it's actually useful or not. But thank you, and we'll see you next week for episode 3.